Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. We're going to be talking about the Internet of Things with Ali Smith, who's our services manager for the ITS security and identity team. Before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know we are recording today's session, so you'll get a follow-up email from me later on with a link to the recording, as well as any other helpful links that we talk about during today's session. We're also expecting a lot of people to sign into today's session, so if you have any questions at any time during the demonstration, please feel free to just put them in the chat as we have everybody's microphone on mute just to limit some background distractions. But other than that, Ali, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Vanessa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. All right. So as Vanessa mentioned, if you have any questions at any time, put them in the chat. And if we don't get to them today, I'll answer them via email or Teams afterwards as well. So as Vanessa mentioned, my name is Ali Smith. I am the Security and Identity Services Manager here at Wall Cornell. You guys may have been to a Tech Tuesday or two that I've done before, but I wanted to talk to you guys about Internet of Things this month in honor of National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is every October. Hopefully you guys have seen some of the email blasts that our awesome communications team, Vanessa and Bridget, have sent out. But if you haven't, after the session, I highly recommend you go check it out on our website and take a look what else we have to offer during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So today we will be talking about the Internet of Things. We'll be going over what is IoT, what are IoT devices, what are their benefits, what types are there, what are some examples, how do they work, and how are they used here at Wall Cornell. We'll also get into the history of IoT devices, kind of what the prerequisites for them to get created, how they became so popular, and when the security concerns started up. And also we're going to go over what some of these security concerns are and how you can protect your IoT devices from bad actors. And one of the biggest ways you can protect your IoT devices that we'll get into a little later is securing your home network. So what is IoT? What does it stand for? What types of devices are there and how does it work? So IoT is the Internet of Things, and the term IoT is mainly used for devices that you wouldn't generally expect have an internet connection, but they can communicate with each other independently of human action. So IoT devices extend the computing capabilities past traditional computing devices such as smartphones, desktops, or laptops to traditionally dumb devices like TVs or light bulbs or your thermostat and things like that. So they're everyday things that are integrated with the internet and they can communicate with one another. They can also process with artificial intelligence and machine learning programming, and they have data analysis capabilities, and they can communicate with the internet. They have both industrial and consumer uses, and they're typically integrated into other tools such as mobile devices, industrial equipment, and medical devices. So most IoT devices come with built-in sensors to detect environmental factors. And these factors can range from a variety of things such as detecting the temperature, sounds, directions, vibrations, liquid detections, or optics around them. Many different devices can be classified as IoT, from biomedical implants to sensors on manufacturing and electrical equipment, and also things around your home. A lot of you guys probably own IoT devices and may have even used them earlier today, or might be even using them right now. So IoT devices sometimes communicate with one another and share information to perform tasks. So this integration and communication with each other can form what we call smart environments, such as smart cities or smart homes. So IoT devices sound pretty cool. What are the benefits about them? So they make our world smarter and more measurable. They make our daily activities faster and easier, whether it's in a work setting or a home setting. For example, smart speakers make it easier to play music, set timers, or get information. Home security systems make it easier to monitor what's going on in and outside your home and seeing and talking to visitors. Your smart thermostat can help you heat your home before you're home or cool your home depending on what your temperature preferences are. Smart light bulbs can make it look like your home even when you're out because you can turn them on from anywhere. And a lot of the sensors in IoT devices can also help us understand how noisy or polluted our environment might be. Self-driving cars in smart cities could change how we build and manage our public spaces. So, for example, in a smart home environment, when a person arrives home, their car might communicate with their garage to open the garage door. Once inside, the thermostat would already be adjusted to a hotter or colder setting, depending on what was preset, or even depending on settings that you may have changed while you're out and about. Same goes for the lighting. It might be all, excuse me, already registered to a lower intensity and color when you arrive home, or you could have even changed it on the go for when you get home. Other smart home devices include sprinklers that can adjust the amount of water distributed on the lawn based on the weather forecast for that week. And also robotic vacuum cleaners such as the Roomba that learn which areas of your home need to be cleaned the most often. So what types of IoT devices are there? IoT devices fall into two major categories: consumer connected devices or industrial IoT devices. So consumer devices are the ones that make your personal and home life easier. These include smart TVs, smart speakers, smart toys, wearables such as an Apple Watch, and smart appliances. So in a smart home, for example, IoT devices are designed to sense and respond to a person's presence. The other major category of IoT devices is industrial IoT devices. So these are used to make a business's core functions easier. For example, in the medical industry, IoT devices can be used to monitor a patient's health and track their vitals. And if a patient needs attention, these monitors can send notifications to relevant healthcare workers to come check on the patient and make sure that everything's okay. Sensor data is transmitted to monitor applications to ensure key processes are running optimally. So these same sensors can also prevent unwanted and unexpected downtime. So some of these IoT devices are smart enough to tell when one of their parts needs to be replaced and even send a message to a technician to come replace them. So this saves a lot of time because instead of your computer breaking, having a tech come to check it out, having a tech come and go get the actual part that needs to be replaced and then come back and replace it, the IoT device might be able to send the technician a message saying, hey, this device needs to be replaced soon or needs to be replaced now, and this is the piece of software or hardware that needs to be replaced. So this can save the technician time from coming on site to diagnose the problem and then going to actually get the piece needed. And enterprise IoT devices are a subset of industrial IoT devices, and there's a wide variety of them, and they're a bit more similar to consumer connected devices. So in the enterprise, smart devices can help with things like meetings. Smart sensors located in a conference room can help an employee locate and schedule an available room for a meeting, ensuring that the proper room type, size, and features are available. Also, too, you could have smart locks in the office that are set to lock at 5 p.m. and only let in certain personnel or no personnel, depending on what the business's operations are. So what are some examples of some popular IoT devices? So on the left, you might recognize the smart speaker, which is the Google Home voice controller. It's also similar to an Amazon Alexa, and this is a Wi-Fi connected voice controlled smart speaker, which is capable of playing music, answering your questions, and also controlling other devices in the home. So you can use it to listen to media, turn down your TV and speakers. It can manage your timers and alarms, and it can also remotely handle the volume and home lights as well. Here in the middle, this tealish colored IoT device is the Amazon Dash button. And it's basically a small wireless device about the size of a pack of gum. And if you press the button on the device, it automatically can reorder certain products that you use frequently. So you would use your Amazon Prime account to set what products you need ordered. For example, if you know that you need to order Tide detergent very often, you could use the Amazon Dash button, preset it through your Amazon Prime account, that every time you click that button, it will order the exact size of the Tide product that you need to the shipping address that you use with the payment method that you use. Over here on the right is the August doorbell cam. So this is a smart doorbell camera that allows you to answer your door from anywhere. And it constantly checks your door and captures motion changes at your doorstep. So similar to what we were talking about before with smart homes and how IoT devices communicate with one another, you can pair this doorbell cam with an August smart lock to easily let people into your home. So you can use the camera feature to see who's there, and you can use the August smart lock to either let them in or not let them in. The August Smart Cam constantly monitors your doorstep and will click the moments leading up to a motion alert to let you know that there's motion outside your door. And it's got free 24-hour video recording. The last IoT device I have on this page in the middle there, in the bottom, is a Foobot. So this is an air quality monitor, which is helpful in measuring indoor air pollution and can lead to improved air quality in your home, in the workplace, or any indoor space. So it can keep the humidity and temperature levels in check. Um, Air quality monitoring can lead to action steps that you might need to take to make your air quality better. And it can also detect dangerous concentrations and emissions. So we've went over a few different IoT devices, but how do they work? So IoT devices vary in terms of functionality, but they also have some similarities in how they work. There's three main components, sometimes two, but sometimes three, that make up the IoT devices processes. So the first is the smart device. This is a device like a television, security camera, or exercise equipment that has been given computing capabilities. And this device interacts with the real world in some way. And then the second part of IoT devices is the actual IoT application. So the application is a collection of services and software that integrate data received from various IoT devices. And the third part of an IoT device that is optional and not always present, but sometimes is the graphical user interface. So although this isn't an absolute requirement, many IoT devices are configured and managed through a software application. So some devices do have integrated web servers, which eliminates the need for that external application. But a lot of IoT devices have a mobile app or website that can be used to register and control your smart devices. So IoT devices can process data locally or through software or in the cloud. And finally, smart devices can make a decision after they analyze commands set up by you and to perform tasks. For example, the Google Nest thermostat. It'll collect data from your HVAC system through wired connectivity. Then it analyzes the data locally. According to your room temperature settings, the smart device would either instruct the HVAC to blow hot air or cold air to make the temperature more comfortable based on the preset temperature that you've programmed in. So here at Wall Cornell, we also have IoT devices. So IoT devices can be used for work, school, clinical care, research, and many other functions here at Wall Cornell. Specifically for the students, we actually even have another IoT network for their smart devices in their dorms called the Apollo Network, which makes it a little bit easier for their devices to access Wi-Fi, given that IoT devices are a little bit more difficult to register with than traditional computing devices. So we offer an IoT request form as well through my help desk, which will allow a member of ITS to help you set up your device and ensure that it's in our asset inventory. Our security team would also review your device to make sure there are no security concerns. So if you are using an IoT device here at Wall Cornell, definitely a good idea to register it through my help desk. So the next thing we're going to talk about is what is the history of IoT? How did it come to be and how have attacks on IoT devices evolved? So how were IoT devices created? The idea of adding sensors and intelligence to basic, dumb, traditional objects was discussed throughout the 1980s and 1990s. There are arguably some earlier ancestors, but most people agree that the 1980s and 1990s was when these early projects started popping up. Apart from these early projects, progress was really slow because the technology just wasn't ready. Chips were too big and bulky, and there was no way for objects to communicate effectively. And one example of these early projects is actually what I have in the bottom right here. So in the early 1980s, the Grand Rapids School District purchased a Commodore Amiga PC, and it operates on a custom software programmed back in the early 80s by a high school student. And this PC was used to control the HVAC for 19 different schools in the Grand Rapids School District. And it's actually still used to control that HVAC today and still supported by the high school student that built it. And that person lives in the area to help provide support. So this computer has been working since the 1980s to control and monitor heat and air conditioning in those 19 schools. And throughout its lifetime, it's only needed to replace 2 monitors and 1 mouse, which is really impressive for how old it is. But there are some concerns that if it needs any more sensitive hardware replaced, it might not be possible because even antique stores might not have the parts to replace it given how old the system is. Another issue lies with how this system communicates. It communicates over a radio frequency, which unfortunately is the same wavelength as the walkie-talkies used by the maintenance personnel at the schools in the school district. So this has caused some disruption of operations from time to time. So this is a great example of an early project for an IoT product that we see today, but still kind of not there yet to the current IoT devices we see out there that work a little bit more streamlined. So a prerequisite for IoT devices we know today was the adoption of IPv6. So IPv6 is the most recent version of Internet Protocol, and it's designed to supply IP addressing. So devices on the internet are assigned a unique IP address for identification and location definition. And IPv6 was also designed for additional security to support the predicted growth of connected devices in IoT, manufacturing, and emerging areas like autonomous driving. So this became a draft standard for the Internet Engineering Task Force in 1998, but then it was ratified as an internet standard in July of 2017. So even though the idea of IoT was coming out in the 1980s and 1990s, we didn't really have a good term for it until 1999. And Kevin Ashton coined the phrase the Internet of Things to describe adding sensors to these physical devices that didn't have the same computing capabilities as computers during that time. So how did IT devices get so popular? So another prerequisite to the IoT devices we know today is the adoption of RFID tags, which is radio frequency identification tags. So these were also around for about 20 or 30 years prior to the mid 2000s, and they were officially patented in the 1980s by Charles Walton. However, when they were initially created, they weren't adopted that quickly. And this was due to their expense and the lack of valuable data proving that they had benefits. So many companies didn't see the value of investing them. Other challenges that inhibited the use of them in those earlier days were the integration of technology into the current stock management system that a lot of retailers were using, and the change in culture that needed to occur to support RFID tags. So adding RFID tags to expensive pieces of equipment to help track their location was one of the first IT applications. And across England, a lot of hospitals used RFID tags to track both expensive pieces of medical equipment and their patients. So since this was rolled out, the cost of adding sensors and an internet connection to objects has continued to fall. So experts predict that the basic functionality of this could one day cost as little as 10 cents. So that would make it possible to connect nearly everything to the internet. So a little bit later in 2022, IoT Analytics put the number of active IoT endpoints at 14.3 billion. This was an 18% increase over 2021's prior year count. So as you can see, IoT devices were getting more popular and getting more popular pretty quickly. In its State of the IoT Spring 2023 report, IoT Analytics put the number of active IoT endpoints at 14.3 billion, which was an 18% increase over last year's count. So they also estimated that the global number of connected IoT devices will grow 16% in 2023 to hit 16.7 billion active endpoints. And this number could fluctuate depending on chipset supply chains and the potential for technology supply shortages, which we already have seen a little bit of these shortages during COVID and in recent years. So this number could fluctuate a bit, but IoT devices are growing and the number of IoT devices is going to keep growing. So as IoT devices have been growing, some of the security concerns around them. In 2015, concerned by the dangers posed by the rapidly growing IoT attack surface, the FBI released a public service announcement, the FBI alert number I091015 PSA. So this document outlined the risks of IoT devices as well as what protections and defenses they recommended. In 2022, the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020, the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020 was signed into law. So this law directed the National Institute of Standards and Technology, otherwise known as NIST, to develop and publish standards and guidelines on the use and management of IoT devices. And although originally these guidelines were targeted for use by federal agencies, NIST decided to roll out in 2022 a pilot program for IoT security device labeling for consumers. And then expanding on this, in 2023, using NIST criteria, the government launched the US Cyber Trust Mark, which aims to provide US consumers with labeled products in IoT that meet these established security criteria. So what are some security concerns around IoT that spurred some of these FBI warnings and some of these laws? And how can hackers use IoT devices to steal your data? Why should you be careful with IoT devices? And what can you do to keep those devices safe? So IoT as an attack vector. From thermostats and sensors to cameras and process controllers, IoT security challenges lie everywhere. In October 2016, the largest DDoS, which stands for Distributed Denial of Service attack in history, occurred, the Mirai botnet attack. So, a distributed denial of service attack is a malicious attempt to disrupt the normal traffic of a targeted server, service, or network by overwhelming the target or its surrounding infrastructure with a flood of internet traffic. And a botnet refers to a group of computers which have been infected by malware and have come under the control of a malicious actor. So the Mirai botnet attack left much of the United States East Coast without internet because attackers scanned the internet for open telnet ports and they used default passwords to successfully compromise a large amount of CCTV cameras and routers, which were then used as a botnet army. By using this botnet army, they were able to overwhelm traffic and bring down internet in the United States East Coast. So in fall of 2016, the Mirai virus infected a reported 600,000 IoT devices, using them to launch this massive DDoS attack. And this Mirai botnet remains one of the biggest threats to IoT deployments because variants of this malware still exist today. So the reason that I have a picture of a fish tank on this slide is because in 2017, hackers used a fish tank thermometer to steal 10 gigabytes of data from a North American casino. So because this thermometer was Wi-Fi enabled, threat actors were able to pull the casino's database of high rollers across the network through the thermostat. This is because that database and the thermostat were on the same network. So ultimately, this device acted as a gateway to the rest of the data center, which contains sensitive personal and financial data and applications. All through a fish tank, they were able to do this. Another way that hackers were able to exploit IoT vulnerabilities was in 2020, an IoT data breach occurred when a cybersecurity expert took advantage of a massive Bluetooth vulnerability and hacked a Tesla Model X in less than 90 seconds without so much as triggering an alarm. And then another IoT breach happened in March of 2021, where Verkada Inc., a security camera company, fell victim to attack which exposed the live feeds of 150,000 surveillance cameras. And these surveillance cameras were in places like prisons, schools, hospitals, and manufacturing facilities. So they obviously contain some sensitive live feeds that were released by these hackers. And the attack wasn't really that complex. The bad actors used a cloud server to gain access to legitimate credentials, which then allowed them to access the surveillance cameras deployed at thousands of customer sites. And lastly, in March of 2023, a smart intercom made by AcuVox was released to contain zero-day vulnerabilities that enabled remote spying and listening. So hackers were able to use this vulnerability in the intercoms to then listen in to the conversations that were occurring over the intercom. So a lot of different ways that IoT devices were exploited in the past and can be exploited still. So this data is a little bit out of date, but in 2018 and 2019, Palo Alto, to understand the full scope of current IoT threat landscape, analyzed 1.2 million IoT devices in thousands of physical locations across enterprise IT and healthcare organizations in the United States. So as you can see here, medical imaging systems, patient monitoring systems, and security cameras were kind of the top three IoT device types that had the highest share of security issues, which is really bad given the sensitive data that all three of those IoT device types tend to contain and transmit. And one of the really notable findings that Palo Alto had was that 83% of medical imaging devices were running on unsupported operating systems. This was most likely due to Windows 7 reaching end of life during that time, which left hospital organizations vulnerable to attacks that could disrupt care and expose sensitive medical information. So even though this data is a little bit outdated, I can say from experience that there are still Windows 7 devices in use today, both for IoT device and traditional computing means. So this is still an issue that can be exploited by hackers. So again, the data is a little bit outdated given it's from 2018 and 2019, but still pretty relevant. Besides using some common attack methods that we see with computing devices such as malware, to protect your computer, your smartphones against malware, which can also be used to compromise IoT devices, Self-propagating IoT malware worms are a new attack that was emerging on the IoT security horizon. So these worms are becoming more common than IoT botnets, and both tactics target decades-old legacy IoT protocols to disrupt critical business operations in the enterprise. And then 41% of attacks exploit device vulnerabilities as the attacks scan through network connected devices in an attempt to exploit known weaknesses. So after they compromise the first device, they can use lateral movement to other devices on the network, whether those be other IoT devices or other computing devices that are potentially susceptible to vulnerabilities. So I know a lot of this is kind of overwhelming and sounds pretty scary. So how can hackers still get into IoT devices? So after an initial deployment, IoT device software is rarely updated if it's even possible. And this is particularly true of firmware where many of these vulnerabilities live. Because of this, devices remain vulnerable to attacks that can be easily prevented for other types of managed devices, such as laptops, desktops, and smartphones. And connectivity limitations, as well as IoT devices' limited computation capacity and power supply could make it impossible to update devices deployed in the field. So a lot of times when vendors release IoT devices, they don't often release updates and security patches for a number of reasons, but some of this is because of how IoT devices are designed. They're typically a little bit more lightweight and don't have the same capacity as traditional computing devices, so they don't even have the storage to store some of these updates and upgrades. Another big issue about how hackers can leverage IoT devices as attack vectors is the use of default passwords and strong authentication procedures. So this makes compromising these devices much easier than a managed IT device. And also too, some IoT devices have the ability to be deployed without passwords or other authentication procedures. So even if using the password that comes with your IoT device is bad, not using password at all is really bad. And some IoT devices even lack that. So since IoT devices are typically connected to a network with other devices, their lack of certain security measures make them easier access points to a network and to other devices on that network. IoT devices typically connect to an ecosystem that includes business apps, data centers, IT infrastructure, and the cloud. So because they lack those strong cybersecurity controls by default, this makes them easy targets for hackers to use for entry in the rest of the network. So even if your IoT device, like a fish tank thermometer, doesn't contain too much sensitive information, if it's on the same network as other devices that do contain sensitive information, hackers can use that IoT device as a gateway to the rest of the network. And the vast majority of IoT devices being released are incapable of hosting software security agents. We have no problem installing agents on Windows, Mac, Linux-based operating systems, but IoT devices have very different functionality and reduced operating systems. So like I mentioned, this is generally because they have limited processing and communication capabilities, in addition to not having space to install such bulky software. An individual endpoint itself can present a risk to security of the entire IoT ecosystem. So devices often lack built-in security controls due to their limitations, namely their small computational capacity and their low power design. So as a result, many of these devices can't support security features such as authentication, encryption, and access control. And even when they do have some of these controls, such as passwords, like I mentioned, some organizations still deploy them without using or enabling these available security controls, such as passwords. And one other major challenge of IoT devices is typically they're turned on 24/7. So it's a little bit difficult to manage them given that they're on 24/7 and since there's so many of them and they can so easily connect to a network. So how can hackers get into these IoT devices? Continued. IoT devices collect tons of data as they measure and record everything from temperature readings to the speed of objects. And they send much of this data to centralized locations, usually in the cloud, for processing, analysis, and storage. And they also often receive information back that can inform them on what actions to perform given the data that they gathered. And studies have shown that much of the transmitted data is unencrypted. A 2020 report from Palo Alto Networks found that 98% of all IoT device traffic was unencrypted, which is definitely concerning given the large number of IoT devices. So Many organizations use IoT devices to collect data from older machines that don't have these most recent security standards. So although this seems like a good idea to kind of keep tabs on those older devices, when organizations combine or users combine legacy devices with IoT, it could expose the network to older device vulnerabilities. So IoT device connections often, or older device connections often rely on DNS, a decentralized naming system from the 1980s, which might not handle the scale of IoT deployments that could go to thousands of devices. So hackers can use DNS vulnerabilities in DDoS attacks and DNS tunneling to get data or introduce malware. So by combining IoT devices that might not have the best security standards with legacy devices that also might not have the best security standards, you're opening up a lot more compromise to the network. The threat of botnets is also big. We've talked about botnets a little bit already. They're a collection of hijacked computers that the attacker can control, and an attacker will use a device's weakness, such as an unprotected network port, to install malware that can then be used to hijack and control the computer or bot. In these kinds of attacks, an attacker infects an IoT device with malware through an unprotected port or phishing scam and co-opts it into an IoT botnet used to initiate massive cyber attacks. So the hacker can easily find malicious code on the internet that detects susceptible machines or hides the code that they're using to hack the device from detection. And as I mentioned before, IoT botnets are frequently used for DDoS attacks to overwhelm a target's the target's network traffic. And botnet orchestrators find IoT devices an attractive target because of their weak security configurations and the quantity of devices that can easily become part of the botnet to be used to target their target network or infrastructure. So in 2023, Nokia released their threat intelligence report, and they found that the number of IoT bots engaged in botnet-driven DDoS attacks rose from approximately 200,000 to 1 million devices over the prior year. And these 1 million devices generated more than 40% of all DDoS traffic in 2023. So IoT devices were used pretty commonly in 2023 to engage in these botnet attacks. So botnets are definitely a huge threat for IoT devices. And the sharp increase, also supplemented by the increased use of IoT devices by consumers around the world, was first noticed at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, but it's since spread to other parts of the world, with botnet-driven DDoS attacks being used to disrupt telecom networks, as well as critical infrastructure and other services outside of the Russia-Ukraine war. So with network access through an IoT device, attackers can exfiltrate data to the cloud and threaten to keep, delete, or make the data public unless paid a ransom. So ransomware, which can also be used to take advantage of computers, smartphones, and mobile devices, can also be used to take advantage of IoT devices. So even when ransomware is used and a user pays the ransom, sometimes that payment isn't enough for an organization or user to get their data back, and the ransomware automatically deletes files regardless. So ransomware can affect businesses or essential organizations, such as governmental services or food suppliers. And lastly, another risk for IoT devices is hackers can physically tamper with the devices. So attackers might access the IoT device to steal data from it, tamper with the device as a way to install malware, or access its ports and inner circuits as a way to break into the organization's network. Some more ways that hackers can get into IoT devices is they can use an IoT ecosystem by inserting or injecting fake nodes into the web of legitimate connecting nodes, thereby enabling them to alter or control the data flowing between the fake and legitimate nodes, and ultimately all the nodes in the web. So a node is a point of intersection or connection within a data communication network. So the individual definition of a node depends on the type of network it refers to, but in the terms of IoT devices, within the physical network of a smart home, each home appliance capable of transmitting or receiving information over the network constitutes a node. So each IoT device on a smart home network would be a node, and hackers can inject fake nodes that can disrupt traffic with the real nodes. So with all of the sensors in IoT devices collecting data on everything you do, the IoT is also potentially a vast privacy and security headache. So for example, with the smart home, it can tell when you wake up, when your smart coffee machine is activated, how well you brush your teeth, thanks to your smart toothbrush, what radio station that you listen to, thanks to your smart speaker, what type of food you eat, thanks to your smart oven or smart fridge, what your children think, thanks to their smart toys, and who visits you and passes by your home and who you let into your home, thanks to your smart doorbell and smart security cameras. So companies make money from selling you these IoT devices, but their business model probably involves selling some of the data that your IoT devices collect as well. So what happens to this data is vitally important to privacy. So not all smart home companies build their model on selling data and detailed pictures of you, but some of them do. And it's surprisingly easy to find out a lot about a person from a few different sensor readings. So in one project, a researcher found that by analyzing the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide levels, temperature, and humidity throughout the day in someone's smart home, they could tell what that person was having for dinner. So it's definitely a good idea to do your research and look at the privacy agreements between not only the vendor you're buying this IoT device from, but also the IoT device itself. So although there's a lot of different ways that hackers can get into your IoT devices, there's a lot of things that you could do to prevent them. So upgrading to a modern operating system and keeping your IoT devices up to date is huge. Like I mentioned, some IoT devices can't be upgraded past a certain operating system, but try to keep them as up to date as you can. Same with vulnerabilities. Some IoT devices can't have them downloaded and installed just given their computing capabilities, but if you're able to, definitely do this. And especially keeping your operating system up to date and downloading patches will help a lot because the most recent version of any operating system contains security features not found in previous versions. And many of these security features are enabled by default to help prevent common attack vectors that we see rising as these versions are released. And make sure your devices have passwords and authentication processes in place. Use multi-factor authentication if you're able, and keep your passwords for IoT devices in a password manager if you can. Also, unplugging these devices when not in use, as you guys saw in some of those hacks that happened with the CCTVs and some of the live streams. If your device is on and listening to you when you're not using it, it could be storing and transmitting some sensitive data that you really don't want it to do. Review the privacy agreements of applications that control IoT devices and privacy statements from companies that manufacture these devices. So do your research before buying any of these devices and enabling them. Opt out of data sharing with the company if you can. And also, if you're using an IoT device for wall cornell purposes, make sure to submit a request through ITS to have it set up and reviewed properly so you can make sure that there's no security concerns and that everything's up to date. Also, make sure that the network that your IoT device is connected to is secure. So you might be asking, how can I secure my home network if I have IoT devices connected to it? So one way to secure your home network is upgrading and updating all equipment and software regularly, including your routing devices. So same with IoT devices, make sure everything's upgraded and up to date when you can, and automatic updates for your IoT devices and routing devices is the best way to go. Also, exercise secure habits by backing your data and disconnecting devices when connections are not needed. Also, limiting administration to the internal network only. So by that, I mean disabling the ability to perform remote administration on the routing device. So only make sure you're able to perform remote administration in your home. Make network configuration changes from within your internal network only. So disable universal plug and play, because these measures can help close holes that may enable an attacker to compromise your network from the outside. Also, if possible, place your router in the center of your home. This is strategic both for security and for actual connectivity. So this will help keep your connection in the confines of your home. For example, if you live in an apartment, your neighbors might be immediately to the left and right of you. So if you place your router near a shared wall, you could be sending your signal near them. And if you don't have a good password or any password at all, they could get into your network. Even if you're not in an apartment, a good router can cast signals next door or across the street. So placing your router in a central location will help reduce how far those signals travel outside your home, which will both give better connectivity to you and also better security for your home network. Another big part about securing your home network, creating a secure Wi-Fi password and changing it often. So avoid easily guessed passwords or phrases such as someone's name, birthdays, phone numbers, or other common information. Same with all passwords. If you run a big social media account for your dog, probably don't make the password for your Wi-Fi network or any other passwords his or her name or birthday or anything else that would be easy to guess. So while simple Wi-Fi passwords make it easy to remember, they also make it easier for others to figure out. So make sure to change your Wi-Fi password often or when you think that your network security might have been compromised. Another way to secure your home net, oh, sorry about that. Another way to secure your home network is to change the default router admin name and password. So along the same lines of password protecting your Wi-Fi, you should also password protect your actual router. So to do so, you should be able to log into your router settings by typing its IP address into your URL, but most routers and providers also have an app that you can access the same settings and information. So your router login credentials are separate from your Wi-Fi network name and password. And if you aren't sure what the default is, you should be able to find the default name and password on the bottom of your router. And if you try to log in with that default name and router password, it's not working, then you know that it's not the default name and password and it's been changed. So the firewall on your router and Wi-Fi encryption is definitely something you should verify is on, and if not, you should turn it on. So most routers have a firewall to prevent outside hacking and Wi-Fi encryption to keep anyone from eavesdropping on your data sent back and forth between your router and connected devices. Like I mentioned, the IoT traffic that sometimes isn't encrypted, you want to make sure that traffic on your network is. Both of these are typically active by default, but you should check just to ensure that they are on. And you should ensure that your personally owned routing device supports basic firewall capabilities. So verify that it includes network address translation to prevent internal systems from being scanned through network boundary. And make sure that wireless access point generally do not provide these capabilities, so it may be necessary to purchase a router. If your internet service provider supports IPv6, ensure your router supports IPv6 firewall capabilities. So another great way to protect your home network is network segmentation. So I'm sure all of us have heard from our guests, can I have your Wi-Fi password? It's something that is a huge part of our culture today. When you go to someone's house, you want their Wi-Fi password just so you're not using the data of your mobile device. So before sharing access to your main home network, consider creating a separate guest network for any of your visitors. I'm not implying that any of your visitors have any malintent and might try to be hacking into your network, but their devices or anything they download while they're connected to your network could be infected with malware or viruses that target your network without them even knowing it. So a guest network is also ideal for your IoT devices, which don't hold a lot of sensitive information sometimes, but are more easily hackable than some of your other devices like computers and mobile devices like smartphones. So leverage network segmentation in your home to keep your wireless communication secure. At a minimum, your wireless network should be segmented between your primary Wi-Fi, your guest Wi-Fi, and your IoT network. As I mentioned with the example of that casino getting hacked through their fish thermostat, if they had their thermostat separated onto a different network than their database, that wouldn't have happened. So network segmentation can definitely help if you do happen to get compromised on your less secure devices, keeping your more secure devices safe. Your internet service provider may provide you a modem or router as part of your service contract, but to maximize admin control over the routing and wireless features of your home network, you should consider using a personally owned routing device that connects to the ISP provided modem or router. Like I mentioned before, you should turn on all automatic updates for your routing devices. This can minimize vulnerabilities and improve security because the routing devices on your home network will be updated to the latest patches through these automatic updates. And these devices should also be replaced when they reach end of life for support. This ensures that all devices can continue to be updated and patched as vulnerabilities are discovered. So if you're using end of life hardware for your networking capabilities, you do open up yourself to vulnerabilities. So to keep your wireless communications confidential, ensure your personal or ISP provided wireless access point is capable of Wi-Fi protected access 3, WPA3. If you have devices on your network that do not support WPA3, you could select WPA2/3 instead. So this will help your older devices connect using WPA2 if they don't support WPA3, but can also default to the stronger way of connecting through WPA3 for your newer devices. And again, I know I've said it multiple times, but strong passwords and passphrases. So when you're configuring WPA3 or WPA23, use a strong passphrase with a minimum length of 20 characters. If you're planning to purchase a new device, ensure that it's WPA3 personal certified. You should also change the default SSID or service set identifier to something unique. Don't hide the SSID, as this doesn't add any additional security to the wireless network and may cause compatibility issues. So actually changing the SSID to something unique is a little bit more useful than hiding it. So safeguarding against eavesdropping. Be aware that your IoT devices have microphones and are listening to conversations. So even when you're not actively engaging with the device, such as your Alexa or your Google Home, they still might be listening even when you're not asking them questions or asking them to do something. So if compromised, a hacker can eavesdrop on your conversations happening near those devices. So you should limit your sensitive conversations when you're near these smart speakers or other devices like baby monitors, audio recording toys, and things like that, and consider muting their microphones or unplugging when they're not in use. Same goes for cameras on some of these devices and even your laptops and devices such as that. Cover them when you're not using them, because you don't know if a hacker hacks you, they could be using this microphone or camera even when you're not suspecting it. And disconnect internet access if device is not commonly used, but be sure to update it when you do. So if there's a certain IoT device that you don't use that often, disconnect internet access when you can, but then when you connect to internet access, make sure to check for the latest updates so that IoT device or any device is updated, even if you're not using it that frequently. And last but not least on this page, you should schedule frequent device reboots. This minimizes the threat of non-persistent malicious code on your personally owned device by rebooting it periodically. Malicious implants have been reported to infect home routers without persistence. So at a minimum, you should schedule weekly reboots of your routing devices and any other devices like smartphones, computers, IoT devices. Regular reboots help to remove implants and ensure security. So last page about how you can secure your home network. And a lot of these tips have to do with your actual devices and not your routing devices, more of the computing devices you use like laptops, desktops, and smartphones. Leverage security software. Even though a lot of IoT devices can't install security software, leverage the security software that you can on those devices and leverage it on your computers and smartphones, such as antivirus, anti-phishing, anti-malware, safe browsing, and firewall capabilities. So security suites might be built into the OS of your laptops and computers or available to install as a separate product. Full disk encryption should be implemented where possible on laptops, tablets, and mobile phones to prevent data disclosure if that device is lost or stolen. And many mobile devices enable disk encryption by default, and security software can make it easy as just pushing a button to enable this. I know this might be my fourth or fifth time saying it, but passwords should be long, complex, and difficult to guess for all of your devices. So for your IoT devices, your routing devices, and your computers and smartphones, make all of these passwords difficult and easy to guess, and make sure that your challenge prompts as well for these passwords are difficult. For example, if one of your security questions is, what was the street that you grew up on? Make sure that those security questions are very difficult to guess the answers to as well, because in this day and age of social media, we provide a lot of information about ourselves that we might not even realize. So like I mentioned before, if you run a huge Instagram account for your dog that's pretty famous and your password prompt is, what's my dog's name? That might not be the most secure way to use to remember your password. Also, again, using a password manager where you can is highly recommended because it allows you to use unique and complex passwords without needing to remember all of them. So limiting the use of the administrator account. So on your computers and smartphones, or mostly on your computers and laptops and desktops, the privileged administrator account can access and potentially overwrite all files and configurations on your system. So because it can access more files, malware can more effectively compromise your system if that account is hacked. So in order to prevent this, you should create a non-privileged user account for normal everyday activities such as web browsing, email access, and file creation editing. And you should only use that privileged admin account for maintenance, installation, and updates and other privileged account features as opposed to using it for browsing the web. Also, exercise secure user habits in general, no matter what devices you're using. So to minimize ransomware risks, backup data on external drives or portable media, disconnect and securely store external storage when it's not in use, minimize charging your mobile devices with computers, use a power adapter instead, and definitely avoid connecting your devices to public charging stations. I know it's tempting when you're out and about, but try not to use public charging stations to charge your devices. And leave your computers in sleep mode to enable downloading and installing updates automatically. And like I said, with routing devices, regularly reboot your computers to apply updates and turn off or disconnect devices from the internet when they're not going to be used for an extended time. For example, if you're going on vacation, it's probably a good idea to turn off your computer if you're going to be gone for a week or more. And definitely ensure confidentiality during telework. In this time where a lot of us are working remotely, we're going to be using our devices for a lot more sensitive purposes than we probably did before COVID. So the security of your home network can directly affect not only your personal information, but your work information and networks when telenetworking. So use a virtual private network, otherwise known as VPN, to remotely connect to our internal corporate network via secure tunnel, because this will add a layer of security while allowing you to take advantage of services that we normally offer on our on-site network. So we use Cisco AnyConnect here. So connect to that VPN when you're doing any sensitive work or school functions, and also too when you're trying to access our internal network. And when you're connecting to other work services, such as websites and cloud-based office apps, be sure that it's through a secure tunnel by checking for that little lock icon on a web browser's address bar. And this is kind of just a good thing to keep in mind in general when you're browsing. It's not a full safe, but checking for that little lock on the address bar can make sure the sites you're visiting are more secure. So I know that was definitely a lot of content, but does anyone have any questions?
For those who came in a little late, feel free to pop any questions into the chat. Allie, you have some clapping emojis. Thank you so much for giving us all this information about how to protect our IoT devices.
Yeah, anytime. And thank you guys so much for sticking through me with this and hearing about IoT devices. I hope you guys learned something today, especially things that you can use not only for Wall Cornell purposes, but also at home. And I also hope you guys check out those National Cybersecurity Awareness Month tips and tricks we've been sending out.
Yeah, so about that, we have a link on the ITS website that I'll send to everybody in the follow-up email. It has all of the communications we've sent out so far with tips. We've talked about, PHI in subject lines and how to use IoT devices safely. We'll also have some information. We've also sent out some information about generative AI and have some other tips that we've planned out for later this month. We also have a security quiz that we have sent out to everybody that you can still take until the end of this week. I'll be sure to put that in the email. You can test your cybersecurity knowledge and you could potentially win a prize. So, definitely encourage you guys to take that. You could win something fun. We do have a question from Andrea. Are there any security issues with different frequencies of Wi-Fi networks? For example, 2.5 gigahertz versus 5?
That is a very good question. I actually do not know the answer to that, so I can follow up on that. But that's a good question, and definitely something I will share with the group once I look into that a little bit further.
We're getting some good jobs. No problem, Andrea. We'll be sure to get you that info. I don't see any more questions. So, this was informative as someone becoming interested in IT and considering a career in cybersecurity. Thanks, Allie. We got that from David Lax.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so I can wrap up this session. But thank you guys so much for joining. Again, if you have a question that comes up a little later, feel free to just reply to the email that I send out to everybody. Things always come up after a session, so don't be shy. We're happy to take your questions and answer them to be as helpful as we can for questions you might have about IoT or just security in general. So thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much, Allie, for taking us through these cybersecurity tips during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And you'll get an email from me soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.